I get a lot of positive feedback in emails, but once in a while I get people that disagree with me, and that's fine. I have no problem with that as long as they are not rude. And this individual got quite rude, so I stopped talking to him. But he did bring up an interesting point, and it's too bad he was rude because I would have liked to have continued the conversation with him. And he basically couldn't believe that I stated that democracy in ancient Greece allowed intellectual freedom, and some other statements I apparently made in earlier videos. And clearly he did not watch the entire series, because if he had, he probably would not have asked these questions. But he basically disputed that. And his main point was that it was the Democrats who killed Plato. Now, he said Plato. It was actually Socrates, so I corrected him on that, and he apologized. It was Socrates who went through that terrible trial and was ultimately executed, probably the most famous trial in history. But his point was that, hey, you're saying all these great things about freedom, but it was those very Democrats who killed Socrates. So how dare you say something like that? Now, first of all, as you know by now, what is the one common theme in ancient Greece? Well, it's the Democrats versus the Oligarchs. And how many times have we talked about that? In all of the cities, there is always that main factional dispute going on. And so that's what I tried to explain to him, that this really was a factional dispute. Had the roles been reversed, the outcome probably would have been very similar. It was very common once the opposing faction took over, either to execute the opposing faction, kick them out, or put them through these show trials. And again, we've talked about that throughout this series. It's a very, very common theme. The other point I wanted to make is that it really was very different in Greece. We have to remember that in the ancient world, most political institutions had a king, and surrounding that king were his subjects. There was not a lot of intellectual freedom. It really all started in Greece with the idea of the citizen. That was really something very, very different. That had never been seen before. And I talked about that in early videos. And that really was the difference maker. And that's why we see the Greeks begin to question things. The Greeks were really into questioning everything that was around them. And the early Greek philosophers didn't want to just explain everything from a mystical perspective. They started to ask questions about what the nature of the universe was and started to form some of the first scientific disciplines. Now, that's not to say that other civilizations didn't make their own contributions. Certainly the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians made great advances in technology. So again, he took this way too literally, and it was quite obvious to me he had not watched the entire series, because if he had, he would have realized that there was a constant struggle between the oligarchs and the Democrats. It's almost impossible not to read about some factional dispute that was going on in the various cities around ancient Greece. Now, the other thing I would want to ask this individual is, what are his expectations of ancient Greece? What is he expecting from the Democrats in ancient Greece? Does he think this is some sort of utopia? And I think there are some people who think that, but it wasn't. The ancient Greeks did wonderful things during their time, as we know. Really, just amazing things. The world today would not be the same without the ancient Greeks. But there was also a lot of bloodshed, a lot of savagery, and if you followed my entire series, you would know that all too well. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is nothing is perfect in this world. I think that's the one common theme. Where there are great civilizations, error is great as well. And that even goes on in our modern world today. We are by no means perfect. There is still a lot of savagery in modern times, but there is also a lot of good. And I think it will continue on in that manner.